Okay, so as far as reviewing the cat, I'm not sure how you want to do that. I'm not going through the material or anything, so I'm going to answer questions that you guys have. Okay, I brought the notes with me in case I need it. So, but do you want to like go by one, like one by one maybe? All of them? No. So I actually have to leave at 1:45, but I'll be glad to stay here until, well, yeah, 1:45, and then on Sunday. 5 minutes review? No, that's not enough. Oh no, I always eat later, so that's not. Any questions, guys? So I'm just pulling random questions about the analgesics, CNS analgesics. So what techniques did we use to prevent the abuse of these drugs? Embeda? How did we exactly? So which technique in Embeda did we use? So morphine from the outside, okay, and then inside we have like a small sphere that has naltrexone. Why is that? So if someone, well, first of all, the outside, maybe I should draw something here. So you have this and that, okay? So you have, let's say, morphine here, and we have naltrexone inside. And this layer here would allow only, release slowly of the morphine, okay? So the outside layer here is designed in a way to make the morphine released slowly, okay? So those drug addicts who try to break this system, they would crush the tablets, okay, to break the system such that they can get, all the morphine in their body. If they do that, then they will also break this part, and then this part will be released along with the morphine. And naltrexone is an antagonist, right? So they are gonna get, both the agonist-antagonist effect, and the antagonist will block the agonist effect, okay? But if they take it as it's supposed to be taken, then the drug will go through the, the stomach, the morphine will be released in small amount of time, the naltrexone will never be broken, and then it will leave the body, right? Any questions about this section in general, about the CNS analgesic? Yes, I'm sorry. The table that compares all of them? The most what? I'm sorry. Right. So potency and lipophilicity are separate things. They're not related. Okay. So lipophilicity would affect how the drug will cross the blood-brain barrier. Once it does there, potency is how strong the drug binds to the receptor. Okay. So if you have the OH, this one here, if the OH group here is available, the drug will bind very strongly, very potently to the receptor. If it's covered like this, CH3, then this will be inactive, okay? Also, we have other parts of the drug, such as adding an OH group here or removing the double bond in the table. Sure. Uh-huh.
It's a donor instead of like this one would be an acceptor.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So her question is, in the morphine here, we have an OH, so it acts as a donor. It can actually act as an acceptor as well, right? Because having an OH means that first you could accept a hydrogen, right? And you could donate hydrogen. The oxygen here by itself can accept the hydrogen, okay? Here, you only have oxygen, so you could only accept hydrogen bond. You cannot donate, okay? Now, which one among all these three, forget about these three. Which one among these three is most potent? Oxymorphone, why is that? First, it has an OH group here that was found to be important to bind with the receptor. And it has a flexible ring. So the double bond here was removed, and you have this ring is more flexible, and it was found that this double bond binds, it actually binds to another different site at the receptor that was found to be important for activity and potency. So oxymorphone is most potent. What comes next? Hydromorphone, because it's the same except with the OH. And then finally, the morphine. The same rank goes here, okay? This is most potent, then this, then that, okay? Except for these three, we have CH3 here, which makes it inactive. So all these are actually prodrugs, okay? So why did we add the CH3? More lipophilic, that's one reason. Okay, so it's more lipophilic, so it's able to cross the blood-brain barrier, that's right. What else? Excellent, metabolism stability. So the drug, this OH group here could be used, the example of the Hanker OH group, it could be used to attach a glucuronic acid and make the drug, metabolized. So if we block the OH group, then the drug can pass through the liver and not being metabolized. Not only that, when it passes through the liver, it actually gets activated because now the CH3 here will be removed, and we go back to something like that. So now we have the OH free, it can bind to the receptor, okay? So it's one way of protecting the drug just for some time, so the liver would activate it, and now the active form is in the circulation, it can reach the blood-brain barrier. Well, the problem is it only actually converts 10% of this drug. The other 90% stays with the CH3. It goes through the blood, passes the blood-brain barrier, and then, but it's inactive. So we only get 10%. So we fixed, one problem with the availability, but then only 10% of the drug makes it, which makes it, less potent compared to the other ones. And I mean, in general, which ones are stronger, the prodrug ones or the other ones? Right, so prodrugs are not as active as these, okay? Yes. Yes, so, yeah, so don't worry about lipophilicity, which one is more lipophilic than the other, because it's a tricky part and we're only going by experiments, okay? So we're only going by experiments which is more lipophilic, but generally speaking, just adding CH3 makes it more lipophilic. But among the same class, I'm not gonna ask about lipophilicity among the same class, okay? Say it again. Oh, so anytime we say efficacy, we're asking whether the drug is an agonist or a partial agonist or antagonist. So this is efficacy. So in this case, we say all of them act as an agonist, so they all have the same efficacy. That's because they all give you full effect at the receptor. Yes, I'm sorry. Okay, so no, because yeah, so if you wanna like compare between drugs, which one is agonist, which one is antagonist, you look at the nitrogen here. If it has a CH3, then it's an agonist. If it has the methyl cyclopropyl, if it has something like this, or if it has something like that, then it's actually antagonist. That's, well, yeah, that's the one attached to the nitrogen, regardless it's an R1 or, I'm not worried about R1 because it might change R1 or R2 it's not fixed, okay? So whatever is attached to the nitrogen here, if it's a methyl or if it's cyclopropyl, or if it's an ethylene, this is how we decide if it's an agonist or antagonist. Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. Second. Sure.
So these values up here are the log p values, right?
Which one? Yes. So these are the log B values. Yes. Which.
But this one is higher than.
Right. So that's why. Yeah. So. So only look at general. This group is more lipophilic than that. Don't look at the details inside, because I know there is some experimental, conflicting results when it comes to experiment. That's true. Yeah. Never. Yeah. So the lipophilicity has nothing to do with the potency. Okay. Yeah. So yes. So this or that will make them antagonist. Okay. That's a good point. So which part of this molecule is the message? Which part is the address? So that, yeah. So this part, guys, the OH here and CH and the nitrogen, whichever part is, which is basically the pharmacophore. Remember, that was the pharmacophore. So this part, the pharmacophore, is the message, right? So the message to the receptor is to be, an agonist or an antagonist. This other part here will be the address, okay? So it tells us which receptor the drug should bind to, okay? Yes, sir. The table. Yeah, okay. Let's look at here. It's the same thing here. So this part here would be the message. This part here would be the address, okay? Any questions about this? Yes, ma'am.
This is the in terminus. Is the message, or is it just like saying this?
Everything here. So yeah, so you look at this box here. It includes everything. Which is the pharmacophore, right? This is what binds to the receptor, right? This is the pharmacophore. So that's the message. Okay. Okay. I'm sorry. Oh, this one is applications. This is applications. You want to move to the next part? Right, so I actually sent all these and posted them on Canvas already. Any questions about the anticonvulsants? Sure. Mhm. Yes. Yes. Yeah. It was found that whenever you design something that's a GABA agonist, it also acts as a new antagonist. Yes. Mhm. But is that the question that? Yes, it's actually not a full antagonist, it's a partial antagonist. Okay. Which you can look at it as a partial agonist, which is why some people can still abuse that. So the pentazocine, I think, is an example. So pentazocine initially was thought of a good way to prevent addiction, right? But it turns out that it's a partial antagonist, which means it's also a partial agonist. So people could use it, overdose. Okay. Mhm. Yes. Say it again. Yes, this one here should be a negative allosteric modulator. Mhm. Yes, ma'am. Say it again. Oh, phenytoin, okay. Okay, so anytime you saturate the enzymes, then you move from linear to non-linear kinetic, okay? So normally enzymes act in a linear way. You know, you have more drugs, then they act faster, okay? But then when you saturate the enzyme, then they basically get saturated and they reach their maximum speed. And so when you increase the drug, their speed is not going to increase anymore. So normally you have a relationship. You increase the concentration, the speed increases. Increase the concentration, speed increases, right? That's why it's called linear, right? But then at some point, if you saturate the enzyme, then the speed is at maximum. You increase concentration of drug, this is fixed. You increase concentration of drug, this is fixed. So it's not linear anymore. Guess what happened now? The drug increases, the speed is the same, toxicity occurs, okay? And yes, exactly. This is what happens with phenytoin. And anytime we say that this drug has non-linear pharmacokinetics, it means the enzyme gets quickly saturated, easily saturated, and then drugs accumulate. In fact, alcohol has non-linear pharmacokinetic, okay? So your enzymes get easily saturated, and then, you know, you get to the toxic level. And in order to find out how much time you need for the alcohol to drop below the, you know, level, it takes, you know, longer time, and it's not related with the amount of alcohol. I guess it's not linearly related. So when we talk about linear, it means you can just use the half-life and know how much drug will be out of your system, right? So within 5 to 7 half-life, drug is out. But when you exceed the capacity of the enzymes, then it's not linear, and then it's no longer following the, you know, half-life rule 5 to 7, if that makes sense. Okay. Yes, ma'am. How does what? Phosphonaitoin? Okay. So actually, phosphonaitoin still has the same problem of the linear and non-linear metabolism. The only reason we designed phosphonaitoin is to add the phosphate group such that the drug is more soluble, because phenytoin has problems with solubility. Okay. Good. So you do not have to, you know, memorize the name of drugs in each mechanism, but I do want you to know what would be the effect of any of these mechanisms, okay? So if you see, for example, a question like which one of these would cause, you know, inhibition or anti-convulsion effect, right? And then you would see, for example, you know, GABA reuptake transport inhibitor, okay? The mechanism itself. Then you should, you know, if you understand the figure, so you know that by inhibiting the reuptake of GABA, then you will have more of the GABA inside the synaptic cleft, more of the GABA will bind, and then you will have, you know, inhibitory effect. If you see, you know, GABA neuroamynase inhibitor, the same, okay? And the same thing applies on all the other mechanisms, okay? So you don't have to know the examples on each mechanism. Yes, ma'am. Yes, here, I'm sorry.
Can you explain to me why this is true?
Okay. Okay, so in order to have an inhibitory effect, would you increase the difference in the potential around the membrane, or would you reduce the difference in potential? Increase. And what is the term we use to increase the difference in potential? Hyperpolarization. So why would that cause an inhibitory effect? So on the graph, the difference is more negative. Why is this important? How does this cause inhibition? Because the first step before the neuron or the signal gets, the first step in the transfer of the signal is depolarization, right? So depolarization means the difference of the charges between outside and inside would be less, and then there is a threshold which is -50, I think. So if you reach -50, then the depolarization happens and the signal continues. If you don't reach to -50, then you're not gonna cause the signal to move forward. So when you increase the difference, let's say it was like -90. If it's now -120 or -200, then if the signal comes in and causes depolarization, if it's not enough, it's not going to move forward. It's not going to start the process of, action potential, depolarization, repolarization, all these steps. Okay. So normally you have the neuron is being affected by many other neurons. Some of them will increase the difference in action potential, other will decrease. After all, if the final result is hyperpolarization, then the neuron will be inhibited. It's not going to be activated. Okay, that's a good question. Thank you. Somebody else had a question, I think. No? So anytime if we have a GABA and it binds to the GABA receptor, this receptor will let chlorine inside. Okay, that's the job of the GABA receptor. Okay, so chlorine gets inside, it's more negative inside. Of course, it's positive already outside. So the difference will be more and more, the difference from inside and outside. So it's hyperpolarization. So we're talking about anticonvulsants so far. Which one is more toxic, carbamazepine or oxcarbazepine? Why? Because epoxide, right? There's another advantage of the oxcarbazepine over the carbamazepine. I'm sorry, oxcarbazepine over the, what is it? Remember the autoinduction? What's autoinduction? The drug induces its own metabolism, right? So in this case, the oxcarbazepine, besides the fact that it is safer, it also does not cause autoinduction, okay? So the nice thing is we already talked about the barbiturates and the benzodiazepine, here in the anti-anxiety medications, which are also used for the, anticonvulsion. Any questions before we move to the next one, guys? So far, we're at the anticonvulsants, anti-seizure medications. Yes, ma'am. Say it again. Oh, good question. Guys, you've seen in the notes, we talk about drugs that have inter-individual variability. What does that mean? Yeah, so it means people have different speed of metabolizing that drug. I mean, this is not true for all drugs, but sometimes we have, people metabolizing drugs in a different speed, or they have different kinds of enzymes. You've heard of the term pharmacogenomics? No. You did? Okay, so pharmacogenomics, this is Dr. John's specialty, and she's so big on pharmacogenomics, and she will, get you all excited when she talks about that. So pharmacogenomics basically means that someone will have different genes, they will have different enzymes in metabolizing drugs. Believe it or not, for some drugs, this is important, and it's actually a field that's getting more and more common. Some insurance companies now would actually pay for you to go and, make a test, take the DNA and see what kind of enzymes you have, and then bring this report to find what would be the best medication for you. Okay, and instead of trying something, see if it works or not on you without knowing what kind of enzyme you have, this is something that's becoming now new, and pharmacists should be educated. They should be able to look at the reports and read it and see what would be the best choice. Okay, we will see next week, for example, Plavix. You've heard of Plavix? It's one of the drugs that varies from one person to another. So you give a person Plavix, you think it's working, and suddenly they have, well, Plavix is, helps prevents blood clotting. So you give Plavix, you think it's working, but then how do you know? Unless you actually, check their enzymes, see if, it works for them. So the recommendation is, we'll talk about this next week. There's other drugs that, come out after Plavix that actually do not rely on the inter-individual variability, okay? You will see also examples of the codeine. Codeine is metabolized by some people. It's activated to a prodrug. By some other people, it's not, because they do not have the enzyme. So guess what? If you give both people the same amount of drug, then one of them could be toxic. And for somebody else, it might be not even effective, right? So what else? It's interesting. We only have 5 topics, right? It's not much, isn't it? Not much. Okay, maybe. Yes, ma'am.
With this question, right? So it's autoinduction, like to make this correct. Autoinduction occurs when a anti-epileptic drug binds to autoreceptors and inhibit the release of excitatory.
So it has nothing to do with autoreceptor. So guys, in the rats, I mentioned autoinduction, and then I talked about autoreceptor only to confuse you. Okay. Yeah. So it has nothing to do with autoreceptor.
So it doesn't have.
Yeah. Okay. Does not have anything to do with autoreceptor. Autoinduction means the drug induces its own metabolism. Autoreceptor is something else. These are receptors located where? Pre or post synaptic? Presynaptic. And they control or regulate the release of the synthesis of neurotransmitters. So when you stimulate these receptors, what happens? they inhibit, okay? So let's look at the anti-Parkinson. So speaking of autoreceptor, this is an example of an autoreceptor, right? If you design an agonist, it inhibits the synthesis of dopamine. So in the case of Parkinson, what do you want to design for the autoreceptor? An agonist or antagonist? So first of all, Parkinson means too much dopamine or too little dopamine? Too little dopamine, right? So if you give an agonist, what happens to the dopamine? Inhibit synthesis of dopamine. So you want to design antagonist D2 pre-synaptic. There is D2 post-synaptic. Okay? So it's actually challenging. If you design an agonist, it's not going to be able to differentiate between these two. But in theory, assuming that you're able to differentiate between these two, then you want to design an antagonist here, but then an agonist here. Okay, so in theory, you want to design an antagonist here, okay, and presynaptically, and then an agonist here, postsynaptic, because you have less dopamine. Now, other techniques could be, you have dopamine transporter, you have, what else? You have the enzymes that break down the dopamine. They're not shown here, but after the dopamine is released, okay, you have enzymes which one metabolizes the dopamine? Is it A or B? Not both, there's one. I can't remember now, I'm serious. B, okay. B as in David? Okay, and then you have the COMT. So by inhibiting these enzymes, you have more of dopamine, okay? Now the same theory applies if we're talking about the antipsychotics, except here we have lots of dopamine, so we need to inhibit the dopamine, okay? So we could prevent the synthesis, okay, from these enzymes. We could also, what? Antipsychotic, we have too much dopamine. We could give anticholinergic, okay, anticholinergic. For antipsychotic, actually, no, because, yeah, so what is the side effect of anticholinergic? I'm sorry, the antipsychotic? Extrapyramidal effect, major one. So it's like having Parkinson-like effect, okay? And then you want to give anticholinergic, okay? So anticholinergic would be, in the case you want to treat Parkinson, for example, or reduce the extrapyramidal effect. It's not an ideal. Anticholinergics are non-selective, so you really should not be using them. Yes. So if you think of the balance between dopamine and acetylcholine, Parkinson, you have less dopamine and more acetylcholine. So in theory, you could use anticholinergic but they are not selective and they have horrible side effects. So so it's not even listed as one of the options. Okay. So in theory, you can. This is why, in the case of the psychosis, you take antipsychotic, and then you get the side effect of extrapyramidal effect. And then this extrapyramidal effect, which is Parkinson-like effect, could be treated with anticholinergic, but it's like, I think it's like over. Yeah. So don't think about anticholinergic as an option. Yeah, in theory it is, but again, problems with selectivity, because if you take anticholinergic, it's going to go everywhere, and then it's going to cause all these horrible side effects. Can't see, can't be, can't shit, can't. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I know the question. Okay. Okay. So, and I'm surprised that like majority of you missed this question. So we already know that, for example, smoking cigarettes or some materials in the cigarette smoking induces the enzyme, right? What is it? Let me look again. I'm sorry. They induce CYP1A2, okay? Yeah, I'm sorry. Do you have anything here I should hide? Oh my God. I'm so sorry. I just violated FERBA law. And it's even recorded, so I'm in trouble now. Anyway, forget it. Forget this question. Okay, so the smoking cigarette thing, it induces enzyme, regardless what it is, okay? And then there is a drug that's metabolized by this enzyme. So if you smoke cigarettes and you take this drug, what happens? Right? Underdose, right? Because metabolism is induced by cigarette smoking, so you get underdose. So you should, this would be one of the things you want to look at if you to select a drug, right? So you want to look, if someone is smoking, then you would select a drug that is not affected by this enzyme, okay? The second part says, okay, so the second part talks about the drug, which is clozapine, okay? So clozapine is the substrate for this enzyme. So what happens if you take clozapine and you are a cigarette smoker? Okay, so, and think about the same scenario if you drink caffeine, which is an inhibitor for this enzyme. Okay, so you drink caffeine, you inhibit this enzyme, you take this drug that's metabolized by this enzyme, what happens? Okay, and let me tell you something. Anytime I see a chance to ask a question about induction and inhibition of an enzyme, I will ask it, because this is important. This is the most important thing you do as a pharmacist. Like I said in the example and in the video we've watched of the accident, doctors rely on pharmacists on checking drug interactions. Okay, so you should know this by heart. Induction, inhibition of the enzyme, this is the most common way. There's other ways, absorption, at the level of absorption, at the level of the protein binding, at the level of the, transporting a drug. So we will see many of these examples, and I will always ask a question about this because I want to make sure you get this concept clear. Cheryl, yes. Yes, of course. Oh, you have to memorize. Of course not. So, yeah. So, I mean, if if you memorize it, you're gonna forget. But conceptually, if you understand the concept, you can use it, right? So, if you understand the concept, then all you have to do is just look up something in the, find out what effect you have, then you could make the conclusion. Okay. Yes, sir. And
cigarettes, they affect the enzyme of clozapine that would break down clozapine, but
Oh, so some studies showed that smoking cigarette prevents developing Parkinson.
Do they have any antipsychotic?
And the explanation, oh, antipsychotic? No, we're not talking about antipsychotic, no. So and the explanation was, you know, because they have some MO inhibitors, but then clinical studies have shown that, you know, MO inhibition does not, you know, like help with Parkinson in the long run. They do not, you know, prevent the progression. Right. So we're right. So we are not sure exactly. So we are not sure what is it exactly that, you know, smoking cigarette. It's just, you know, based on results and data shows that, you know, smoking cigarettes, if you live long enough, then you will be less likely to have Parkinson. With the case of caffeine, we had done so. For that particular example, for the clozapine, caffeine actually inhibits this enzyme. Okay. Yeah. So they have the cigarette smoking induces the caffeine inhibits. So maybe you could take the drug and, you know, smoke a cigarette and drink coffee and then balance both of them.
So just to rephrase that, I'm sorry, no, thank you. So just to rephrase the question, right? So let's say it was caffeine that inhibited their enzyme.
Yes.
Then you're going to have an overdose.
Exactly.
That would lead to that anti-criminal side effect coming up because of the overdose.
Oh, excellent. Yes, yes, thank you. Yes. So if you have an overdose of the clozapine, what happens? You get the side effect of extrapyramidal, EPS, extrapyramidal syndrome. Okay. You're welcome. Exactly. Yeah. So the question has more than one component. I have to leave in 4 minutes. So come up with the questions, and then if not, then we'll continue Sunday at 9 o'clock, right? So you have 4 minutes. You know, I do want to encourage you to ask questions through the emails. I mean, only few of you do that. So, you know, I'm available through the email. You can always ask me questions anytime you want. I mean, it doesn't have to be in the review session, okay? So you think of something, or you are not sure if I should memorize this, or if I need to know that, then, you know, you have your phone. You can send email, right? Yes. Yes. So if it's a question, if it's like a conceptual question, like, you know, inhibit this, does it cause metabolism or that? You know, this is a concept that all of you should know, so I don't share it. But if a question comes up like, you know, are we supposed to memorize this list of drugs? Then I would feel it's unfair to answer this question to you, but not to everyone. So I would share it with everyone and say, you know, this is the question I received. I want to make sure we're all on the same page. And that's the answer, okay? So if it's a question related to, you know, affect everybody's studying, then yes, I will share it with everyone, okay? Yes.
Okay, it's something about. We're not sure whether you said that, like, if it's more half-life, then that means more duration half-life, or you shouldn't relate it.
Okay, that's a good one. So guys, what is the relationship between T half-life and the duration of action? First, is there a relationship between them? Yes or no? Is there a relationship between the elimination half-life, or also known as T half-life, or and duration of action or not? There is. Are they proportional? Yes. So the longer the T half-life, the longer duration of action. But is duration of action equal T half-life? No. Okay. Yeah, but they are correlated. Now, why is it not equal? Because there are other factors involved, which is the minimum effective concentration and the absorption rate, and what else? And how strong the receptor binds, the drug binds to the receptor. So, you know, you have a curve and you have a line that decides the duration of action. So the curve goes like that and goes down. So if the minimum effective concentration is lower, then the duration of action is higher. If the absorption rate is faster, then again, duration of action is more, okay? In fact, why is it that we rarely talk about the absorption rate? We always talk about elimination rate, and it's the most determining factor. Why is it that we rarely talk about absorption rate? No, say it again. Because absorption has to do with the intestine. They all share the same, I guess, factors. Have the large surface area of the intestine, and they have good lipophilic, hydrophilic properties. So majority of the drugs have similar rate of absorption. So we don't talk much about different rates of absorption. Okay, most of them have a similar rate of absorption, so we don't compare between them. But when it comes to elimination, drugs are metabolized in various and different ways through different enzymes. Some of them are fast, others are slow, and so forth. Okay, but you will learn about this when you from Dr. Takemoto on the pharmacokinetics. Okay, so most drugs have same rate of absorption. It's the elimination rates that varies, and that's where T half-life. Okay, last call for a question. No? Okay, I'll see you Sunday. Thank you.